Thanks for joining us today. And as we kind of talk about reimagining pedagogy for remote learning and share our course and our reflections with you. And so, what we hope to do is to engage you in thinking about pedagogy and perhaps connect with some of the ideas and thoughts that we present today. So, we'll talk a bit and we'll make sure that there's time available for a discussion with you, for kind of all of us to share our experiences. So my name is Mike, and I wear a few different hats as a pharmacist, an educator, and also a doctoral candidate doing research in education at the School of Pharmacy at MUN here. And I teach specific parts of pharmacy practical courses, but this term, the course that we're going to talk about, 4251, was our own, and I'll pass it on to Abby here.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Abby Turner. I'm also a pharmacist and educator. I have experience working in pharmacies in the community, and I've been involved in the pharmacy practice courses here at MUM for a number of years. Over the last couple of years, I've become more heavily involved in the pharmacy practice courses as an instructor and, as Mike said, and co-instructor this year for the Pharmacy 4251. So in today's session, we'll share our perspectives and pedagogy for remote learning, and we'll also share our redesign of the course. So I'll talk a little bit about our pharmacy practice courses first of all. So starting the very first semester of pharmacy school, students complete a pharmacy practice course every semester. In our pharmacy curriculum, there are a total of 8 pharmacy practice courses. These are practical courses that build on each other, and the course content supports and aligns with what is taught in other pharmacy courses in the current semester, as well as incorporate what they learned in previous semesters. So our course, the Pharmacy 4251 course, is the 6th course. And so this is a third-year pharmacy course. So in these practice courses, students learn about pharmacy and pharmacotherapy and have opportunities to develop and apply skills. So some examples of some of the activities that we do in our courses are we have simulated patient and healthcare professional interactions. We do a lot of case-based learning. And in our particular course, the 4251, we focused a lot on hospital pharmacy practice. So I'll just talk a little bit about our specific course format. So we predominantly use Brightspace. It was our main source of communication, especially with the announcement section. It was a repository for our course content and a platform for assignments, quizzes, and feedback. We also use Zoom. So we initially used Zoom because we really wanted to use the breakout features, and initially WebEx did not have that feature. So we used Zoom as it allowed us to carry out our simulated interactions, and the breakout rooms also enabled us to be able to split the students up into groups and do the group work. So what the pharmacy practice course consisted of was we had one weekly lecture slash class time. So I say class time / lecture because we didn't always lecture during that time. It was a time to kind of regroup, reflect on previous lab practical sessions that we had. We also implemented some simulated interactions during that session also. And so that was 2 hours of class / lecture time. And the students also had one weekly practical session. So so that would be 3 hours, and we split the students into 2 sections. So in our pharmacy classes, we have about 40 students. So the students are divided into 2 lab sessions. So the goals we had for our course are we wanted to provide students with a safe environment to learn, develop, and apply their knowledge, skills, and attitudes for pharmacy practice. We wanted to foster collaboration and collegiality between students and with instructors to enhance their learning. We also wanted to provide students with an environment to think critically and develop decision-making skills. And the last course goal we have here is one of our national education is a national education outcome that we need to think about when we're designing our courses. And so it is a goal to meet the competencies of a pharmacy graduate, which involve being a care provider, professional, communicator, collaborator, leader, manager, scholar, and health advocate.
So I think before we talk about how we design the course, I think it's important in seeing, we're at a university here, um, to draw on literature, both during this pandemic as well as other kind of guiding literature in education. And I want to provide a few examples of the conversations that were and are still occurring in pharmacy about remote learning. So I'm not going to go into specific detail or take a stance on kind of the terminology that people use, as I find it can be quite variable. So terms like online, remote, distance, emergency, remote, hybrid, blended models, face-to-face, all these used in different capacities. For this course and our talk today, I think we'll focus on what our students experienced, which was not being in a physical classroom when usually we would be in one. So, anyways, in pharmacy literature recently, I found that there's been quite a lot of emphasis on technology and specifically the methods used. So, for example, Roche's paper on using Blackboard Collaborate, or Leon's and colleagues describing tech solutions when they're forced to switch to remote education. And then there's the subsequent research on how students and faculty perceive those methods, um, such as remote simulations or exam proctoring. And lastly, there are editorials and summaries, such as the last reference there, who wrote about um, challenges with technology and remote teaching and how to overcome them. And I think these can be helpful when you're thinking about specific tools or platforms or activities that you may want to model. But from our perspective, it may focus on those methods more so than on pedagogical um, practice. And I think it sometimes focuses more on technology than on actual learning. And I think it's expected given the circumstances of last year. And of course, these are things that are discussed amongst our faculty here. Um, the pharmacy practice instructors in all years of the program get together and we talk about these things, discussing strategies and tools. But what we think is beneficial is to go a bit broader and get away from this emphasis on the know-how of technology and go back to some of the literature in education. So what we selected here then are three things that we kept in mind as we created this course. So I'll talk a little bit about caring, pedagogical content knowledge, and authentic learning or education. And I think many instructors think and feel this way as well, but for us, it's nice to be able to put some words or terms to it. And this literature is obviously broad and quite deep, and I'm no expert in these things, but um, to me, it doesn't mean that I can't find them inspiring as an instructor. So the first one is caring, which I draw from Noddings, who first wrote this book back in the 1980s. That teaching is an act or an embodiment of caring with a student being cared for. So she writes that the instructor's tasks are to stretch the student's world by presenting an effective selection of that world with which she is in contact, and to work cooperatively with the student in his struggle towards competence in that world. And so as pharmacists teaching future pharmacists, we present a selection of the practice and we work with the students to understand, to make sense of that novel world that they're in. So one of the key things or concepts then was to develop an instructor presence online, which Richardson and others define as the specific actions and behaviors taken by the instructor that project him or herself as a real person. And this includes what others have differentiated into cognitive and social and facilitatory presence. Um, Cognitive referring to instructors considering the students' preparation for learning. Social is thinking about the different kinds of communication and the different interactions that occur. And facilitatory referring to that role of the teacher as a guide, as a mentor. And the second thing is that we kept in mind is about pedagogical content knowledge, and this goes back to Schulman, and Schulman explains it's the ways of representing and formulating the subject that make it comprehensible to others. So basically, that knowing something doesn't mean we can teach it. So how do we turn something that we understand as practitioners into something that students understand? And there's a lot of learning for instructors as well, um, thinking about this and trying what seems to work, what doesn't work, um, thinking about individual students at different places in their understanding and how we might approach teaching differently for them. So I think if there was one easy solution, we wouldn't still be talking about this today. Um, but we constantly thought about this and approached it differently for students. And so one of the more recent concepts I've come across is technological pedagogical content knowledge. TPAC is the term that is used a lot now. Um, and the way I understand it is it's about the knowledge of how to use um, technology as a pedagogical tool, and that these sort of three aspects go together when we're talking about incorporating technology, whatever technology is defined as or whatever that may be, into teaching. So, there's no doubt we need to think about how technology plays a role in what we're doing, and the experience students have with technology. But the concept of helping students make sense of this world of pharmacy really remains the same. And the third is authentic learning or education, and this, back to cognitive development, Piaget, and such. So we really accept and respect that students are responsible for their own learning. They can be as involved as they want, but also that they come into our course with existing and constantly developing knowledge. And even in our course, they will be forming and reforming thoughts and creating knowledge with the various experiences that we give them. So as instructors, we see our role as providing those experiences, providing those opportunities to help transform and deepen their understanding of pharmacy practice. And just as it's not easy to do this in person, it's also difficult online. So again, really focusing on the learning rather than on the tool or technology used. And these three things, caring, pedagogical content knowledge, authentic learning, really guided our philosophy as we moved forward in the course.
All right, so I'll talk a little bit about our course philosophy now. So some of our course philosophy was we wanted to try to incorporate care, we wanted to show our presence, we incorporated balance, student expectations, and authentic learning. So I'll just go into some of these and talk a little more in details by what I mean. So we wanted to provide an authentic learning experience. And as we have our quote here, um, planning an e-learning course, hold on here. Planning an e-learning course from scratch is usually the best way to create an authentic learning experience for students. So we took on that philosophy. This course was originally an in-person course that Mike and another instructor at the School of Pharmacy developed. However, as we were providing this course remotely, we felt it was important to redesign our course based on our philosophy. We did, however, take some things here and there from the original course design. And when we redesigned this course, we constantly reminded ourselves that our students did not choose to learn remotely. And so we had to be considerate of that. So I think that's a good example of us incorporating our care into the course. And another way we incorporated care was to be present for students, as Mike had just discussed previously about presence. So both of us were always present during lectures and practical sessions, even when we had a guest speaker. We wanted our students to know we were real and to develop that collegiality with them. So while we made ourselves present, we also had to consider balancing that presence in our course design. So a quote we liked that described this was by Rose and Adams, who said, "The tyranny of availability and the demanding student requires care and balance." Although we did not find our students to be demanding, but we as instructors had to be aware with the remote course that it can be easy for us to fall into a kind of a habit of 24-hour presence. So when we were designing our course, we had to balance our presence with the students, but still provide care by responding to them in a timely manner. And it also helped that there were two of us to be able to balance that presence. We also wanted to promote balance in the course for the students. So we did that by kind of limiting screen time, by having students turn off videos when they weren't necessary to have them on. And also we wanted to ensure limited workload for the course outside of class and lab time. But we were explicit when it would be required. And so now I'll just talk a little bit about kind of how we enabled our philosophy in the course. So to enable our philosophy, we incorporated organization, consistency, flexibility, and communication. So when designing our course, we wanted to make sure our course content was clearly organized in Brightspace. So we did this by continuously using the student view to check how the student would view it. An example of how we enable our philosophy of consistency was being consistent in when we posted announcements. So for example, we would always post our pre-labs on Friday, so the students began to realize that. And we also were consistent with where to find course material for each week and with our course or with our class and lab links also. So how we incorporated our flexibility into the course was to be flexible with our resources students could use, and we ensured that those students who missed class or practical sessions had the opportunity to learn. In our course, we also wanted to maintain student-instructor communication. Some examples of how we did this was to have timely responses to questions, as mentioned, our presence in lectures and practical sessions, and we also reached out to students who were struggling. So we as instructors wanted to ensure strong communication between us also. So we had weekly meetings where we would reflect and discuss on how students were performing too.
Unmute myself there. Um, so I thought it'd be nice to provide a few examples of what we did and how we um, incorporate our philosophy into this particular course. So one of the things that we did was to increase instructor presence um, through having panel type discussions in small groups of 4 or 5 students. And so we tried to engage the students in talking about primary literature, including how they would incorporate the medication literature into their practice. And so traditionally, students are asked to present papers, present journal articles, I guess, rather than engage in this sort of instructor facilitated type of activity. So for these conversations, we facilitated the group with questions, making some additional connections with aspects of the medications that they've learned or heard about before. Um, and then we did this again with the broad and complex topic of diabetes. And then again with the case-based learning with the various um, patient care cases. And we had different cases for students and instructors, role-playing different patients within these small groups. And we worked with a very fluid outline. So I think that was really, really important um, because it allowed us to adapt um, based on where the conversation was going. And so it meant a lot of open-ended discussion. Um, and different groups and different students could share their thoughts. And going back to how we had our lectures and our classes, having these small groups and then bringing it back the week after in the class time as a larger group was quite helpful. And for each of these, we really tried to make an effort to acknowledge their um, contribution and reflect that contribution um, back to them. So this is an example of how we were present in these particular sessions. And as an example of authentic learning, one of our cases was what we called longitudinal. So we had a patient return several times over the semester, and this is a mock patient. And this is something that I had done last year, but online actually made it a lot easier to organize because we didn't have to work with so many sheets of paper from individual student action plans and the variable scenarios presented to them. So what we could do is we could upload them directly into student assignment submissions and give each student individual scenarios and feedback. So sometimes it was the patient themselves as a role play, sometimes it was other health professionals involved in their care, and sometimes it was written-based activities. So while the patient was the same for all the students, what happened to him was different depending on which scenario, and more importantly, depending on what the student decided to do. And so, by returning to this patient over and over again, we built on each student's individual actions, and they realize that their individual actions have consequence, positive or negative. And so we challenged them to think about and apply that knowledge. In the meantime, we also encouraged them and provided a virtual space for them to discuss with their classmates and instructors. So again, in those breakout sessions that we had, they were able to talk amongst their peers about what's happening with their um, individual patient. And because the patient is the same and the scenarios are different, they can have quite a number of meaningful conversations about what's happening and why that might be happening. So in this way, we tried to create connections with concepts and knowledge that students had before coming into this course, and knowledge that is constantly reshaping and developing about this patient, even within the course. And I think for this, having an understanding of the curriculum and the other courses that the students are taking, really does help.
So our last example here is I'll discuss of how we incorporate our philosophy into our assessment. So to help students with their learning, initially we provided students with lots of formative feedback. So we had a number of activities that were not graded, but the students were to submit these activities to us and we provided feedback on those. So we focused on formative feedback that was timely and specific to the students. So we feel this demonstrated our philosophy of care. And in our pharmacy practice courses, we have exams where we simulate patient and healthcare professional interactions. So for these types of exams, we use technology to our advantage and incorporated that technology into the test question by explaining to the students in the test information that the pharmacy students were about to meet a patient virtually. So we felt this provided students with an authentic learning experience. And in our assessments, we wanted to focus on their learning and not technology limitations. So we tried to remove technology issues and stress with technology. So one way we did that was to have open book evaluations. So they were able to use whatever resources they liked. And we also felt having open book evaluations provided students with a more authentic learning as we wanted them to learn how and where to get information. And another way we minimize stress that could accompany technological issues was our flexibility in exam and assignment submissions. So we provided students with our expectations for completion, so how long we felt this assignment or exam should take them. However, we allowed the students to submit it at the end of lab or, say, the exam period. One of our mechanisms we used to maintain academic integrity was to have assessments that required critical thinking on the students' behalf. So therefore, these assessments required students to rationalize their response. And this meant that we would evaluate them more deeply too. And so now I'll get into our reflections on how we felt the course went. So overall, we felt the course ran smoothly. We had few technological issues. We felt we were able to enact our teaching philosophy, and we also came to realization and felt that it was important to reflect on student performance and to be flexible and adaptable, and to also implement repetition and consistency to enhance students' learning. We also felt we engaged students in the course with positive outcomes. So what I mean by this is we were able to see student learning and improvement, and we also saw students taking and applying their learned knowledge. So the last one here is we also felt we looked for opportunities, not limitations. So for example, we saw the opportunity to redesign the course. So starting it from scratch and then going forward from there. And then we did have a couple of reflections on a couple of things that we thought we could do differently. So some of our practical sessions were quite exhausting for us as instructors. So while the students did not have to tune in virtually for the entire 3-hour practical session, instructors did have to. And so instructors would spend at least half an hour or more with each small group of students, and then having to do it again in the afternoon. So if we could change something, we would maybe have practical sessions over 2 days as opposed to one. So we're hoping we can reduce instructor fatigue and help balance care and attention to students. Another thing that we could have done differently is perhaps give students advance notice on when we plan to have participation in class when we had our simulated interactions. So during the simulated interactions, it's best to have your video on so you're actually interacting with the patient or healthcare provider. But during our class times, lecture slots, students didn't tend to have their videos on. So when we did implement these simulated interactions during class time, students weren't always prepared for that. So they weren't prepared in their appearance or their environment, which sometimes could have limited them from participation.
So I guess, when we think about reimagining pedagogy for remote learning, um, and after our reflections, we really thought that pedagogy, it may not be too different, in remote versus in-person learning. Um, the caring philosophy is the same regardless, and I think it connects quite well with if you were in the keynote session earlier with Dr. Felton and talking about making those connections um, with students. But we do think that technology can provide opportunities for authentic learning and then foster teacher presence, sometimes even more so than in a classroom or in a practical um, uh, session. Um, and some of those opportunities are for students um, to have that platform to work together and to talk to each other and have discussions. And what we really think is we need to focus on student learning more than on methods or technology. So it's very easy, I think, to jump onto technology, but at the end of the day, the student learning is more important, um, and that's the thing that we try to focus on. So we should actively and continually think about our pedagogy, regardless of the um, learning environment, and the three things and the three kind of things: caring and knowing how to um, help students make sense of knowledge and develop their knowledge, create their knowledge, was quite important uh, for us. So I'd like to just end before we go into discussion. This quote from Noddings, I thought it was really, really inspiring. When a teacher asks a question in class and a student responds, she receives not just the response, but the student, What he says matters, whether it is right or wrong, and she probes gently for clarification, interpretation, contribution. She is not seeking the answer, but the involvement of the cared for. The student is infinitely more important than the subject matter. And this is what we um, took into our sessions on a day-to-day basis in that remote learning environment. Again, trying to limit the impact that students had when it's not to their expectation of what the program or the course would be. And again, that they did not choose to be learning remotely. So a whole bunch of references here, but we have lots of time now for questions and a discussion. So we wanted to kind of ask around and ask what your experiences in remote teaching and learning are, and what guided your teaching, um, and what parts of our philosophy, pedagogy, or reflections resonate with you. So thank you for listening, and I guess I will open up the chat there.
Thank you so much to both of you. Not that we're finished yet, but I just wanted to ask if any participants had any questions about your particular approach. Do you invite those questions now as well?
Yes, please.
One thing I was wondering, just to kind of get things started, is if you were able to get any feedback, either formal or informally, just through chatting with students, and how they in particular kind of felt the virtual patient interaction kind of went.
Yeah, and I'll speak to that a little bit. One of the things that we have students do in um, the course is to write reflections on their learning, and the way that we um, framed it is we had a few questions, like guiding questions, that they could consider in these reflections, and then to talk about um, did they feel like they learned what they wanted to learn, what they needed to learn? Um, were there any gaps that they uh, wanted to work on a little bit more? And what were they looking forward to after the uh, end of this term as they move into their actual in practice type sessions? And so the students um, in that feedback did highlight the um, virtual interactions, as well as the longitudinal case. The virtual interactions they they liked because it it was definitely more real to them, and they liked the variety of it, and they liked how um, it was different for different students, and they could all kind of listen in and watch. So I guess a little bit of background. Usually in the past, we do individual um, interactions in person with individual students. But what we decided for this was, because we wanted to foster that collegiality, is that we did them in groups, but each student in that group would have a different type of interaction, and then the other students would be able to watch and comment and raise discussion points and that sort of thing. So they did they enjoyed it, and um, for us, I think we saw that they learned, and at the end of the day, if they learn, then we're happy. So that's reflected in their assessments and their feedback as well. So yeah, so I would say long long answer to your question, but yes, they did seem to enjoy um, that as well.
It sounds like in the end they maybe got more exposure yeah, to those different scenarios than they would normally have gotten in a face-to-face semester.
Yeah, I think so. And I guess some of this stuff as we work through this course, we do still like to be in person, and some of the things that we tried and we did in this course, I think we can bring back into an in-person environment, because we do like to see our students. They get to know us quite well, because we teach in all of the years of their program.
I know there's at least a few of the participants in the window there that I know have been teaching in the past year. I'm curious to hear if anybody found any similarities between your approach over the last year and some of the approaches that you saw here in the presentation.
I haven't actually been teaching, but I am an instructional designer, and actually Kathy Wicks is with me here today, and she's the assistant instructional designer. We worked on the PharmD courses. So I'm just
Ah.
curious today to try to, get an idea of what you were doing virtually as opposed to what we were doing asynchronously. And I guess I just wanted to find out a little bit more about how you went about setting up your virtual simulated cases and what that looked like. Did you have like real actors come in and pretend that they were people, or did you set up case studies? Like how did you do it? Like how did you set it up?
So I guess I can speak more about that. So they were, for the evaluated ones, like their midterm and their final, we would use actors. So either the standardized patient program, or we had uh, pharmacists that we know come in and act. And that mainly is really for the students to just have those evaluated activities with different people. Otherwise, during the course, it would have been myself or Abby, and we had one pharmacist that kind of helped out with these scenarios as well. And so we would be the sort of fake patients, uh, for those types of interactions. And when so we had to set it up so that the student knows, like obviously I would be playing somebody else, and so we give them that information, and they have to get into that mindset of they're speaking to somebody um, else now. So we present them with a background information about a case that uh, they can read and think about, and then they move on into a simulated um, scenario. And I think what's really different about this versus, for example, in the PharmD program or those asynchronous type activities, is that um, our cases are not set in stone. So often with sort of case-based learning, the case is written and it's kind of followed to a T. So it's not real. It, it doesn't allow for that flexibility that having us as instructors there, and responding to the students and what they would do, um, that I guess more traditional cases have. So we really just had an outline, and depending on what the student did, the case could go in a variety of different directions. So it does take a lot of um, effort from the instructor, and it does, and that's why we talked about that attention. Um, you can imagine having a case discussion that's like half an hour, and the one instructor there has to go on all sorts of tangents that some of which you expect and some of which you don't, right? And then to have to do that over and over again, right? So I think that was one of the big benefits versus having that asynchronous type of activity that I think the working professional PharmD program has. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Oh, it did. Yeah, it did. It's much, but really real world, where you don't know what you're going to be asked next. So yeah, no, I think you did a great job. Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, I see the comment from Catherine there. Yeah, and thanks for yes. I found this theme online. Decided that it was nice. My wife is also using this theme for a different presentation that she has. But anyways, yeah, and I think that is really key, right? Our students, when you sign up for a course and it's online and that it's going to be remote, it's a different sort of expectation than when students didn't do that in the first place. And to remind ourselves of that is important. And I credit a lot of that to actually my PhD supervisor. She's not here; she's in another meeting, but that's something that we really have to think about constantly. Yeah, for sure.
What semester was this taught in again?
Just this past winter.
Just this past. Yeah. So would
winter,
the students have had like at least one remote semester under their belt when they came to you?
Yes. So they had the fall semester that was remote, and then they came to us. So, we taught in that one as well, and this kind of philosophy, like we're saying, this philosophy is in this particular course, but in the courses that we taught in the fall, that's also there. I think,
Did you
and so
find
the
any
students are a
big
little bit used to it.
changes? Sorry.
Yeah, no. The students did find some changes. Mainly, I think it's the presence aspect of it. Like we really tried to make an effort to be more to have that instructor presence a lot more this term than when I was teaching in the fall. So in the fall, I had done a number of like recorded sessions, and um, uh, we had a number of asynchronous ones because part of that philosophy was like, okay, if we know that their students are um, doing all this remotely, maybe asynchronous is a little bit easier. But I think we changed that a little bit for this particular course because we wanted to have that presence.
I think having that consistency too really helped them out, because I think there was some feedback from students that they were struggling with, because some instructors were using different platforms for their links for the videos, and it was becoming a lot for the students to have under their belt. So kind of having that consistency in how we designed our Brightspace course shell, I think really helped, and being consistent that we're using the Zoom platform for our skills course, our lectures, and our practical sessions. And so then they know that that's what they're using for our course, and they don't have to be scrambling and looking around for everything else. And they know where to find everything. We opened up each week by week for the materials, and it clearly stated like week 1, week 2, so the students were able to find things and it would become comfortable for them. So I think that helped too.
Yeah, and I'll just share quickly. So our Brightspace shell, like we laid out each week, and showing them the months, and every single week, everything that they needed was there. So we really tried to keep everything organized for them, and making sure that the course shell is there and they have the dates and they don't have to um, look for links, and that sort of thing. So um, I think doing this should be, I think, done regardless, whether it's remote learning or not. But it does take a lot more effort from the um, instructor, because you might not be physically present there to walk up to a student and say, "Oh, it's right over here," right? You kind of have to have all this um, laid out for them, and definitely is the student view, right? Seeing it as a student, to make sure that they can see things um, well. Um, and it's so, like, I don't know, teaching online is a lot more. I think is a lot more work for the instructor, for sure. Um, but it can be rewarding, I guess, when you see that the students are learning.
So now that you have this is Lisa again, so you have your course developed. I'm just wondering, any changes you're going to make going forward that you can, are you going to continue
Um,
to use Zoom, or like would you consider changing over to WebEx, or just curious now,
yeah,
lessons learned kind of thing. Mhm.
yeah, lessons learned. I mean, um, the if I switch over to WebEx, I think that would be fine as well. I have no issues with either um, platform. WebEx is a little bit better technology-wise, as it's linked into Brightspace, right? So that helps. Um, but sometimes I found Zoom a little bit more stable. And but it's really, I guess, that consistency back to the student, right? If I'm going to be using this platform, I should be using it consistently and all the time, and the students shouldn't have to try to figure out where they're going to be virtually the next class. In terms of like what we would do differently, or whether this course will change, um, if I do teach it again uh, next year, I guess. Um, I think so. I One thing that I like to do is that any course material and cases and all that are usually written new every year, um, because we modify them, but also because I post all of that back to the students, so they're not they can always refer back to it, and so I might change some of the um, cases and activities and that sort of thing, um, as I normally do, anyways.
Okay, thanks. Mm.
I see that we've lost a few people as it got towards the
Yeah.
very end. That's not unusual. I gotta say, like, with respect to your second question, like, I feel like when I was teaching, I really, I did care about the students and constantly checking in with them and stuff like that. But I really like how you guys really built it into your philosophy and made kind of caring of the center really at the center, caring of the student at the center of your kind of approach, and how you just kept coming back to that over and over again. It was really nice to see.
I agree, Amy, because lots of times we see everybody just so focused on the new technologies that had to be in place, and everybody was so stressed about how the technologies were going to work.
Yeah,
So it is great to see that, you're focusing on the important things like the student and the making sure that the content is, really accurate in real life. It's great.
yeah. I
Yeah,
found,
and that's the thing.
yeah,
Yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I found that any students that I did, make a particular effort to reach out to because they seemed like they were having a bit of a challenging time, or anytime I asked for particular feedback, that kind of showed that little bit of caring a little bit more. Almost every time I did that, I had students write back to me, and it just kind of showed me how unusual it was that they don't get much of that in a lot of their courses. And they were so appreciative, like, oh my God, thank you for reaching out. That means so much. No, I'm doing fine. I just, fell behind with this, that, and they're just so in awe that someone cared enough to reach out. And yeah, it just it didn't seem like much to me, but it more so was an indicator that this is not happening. This is not the normal for them. And it's not happening in a lot of courses. And I think that's something that we all need to work to change a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, as Lisa said, it's really easy to get caught up in the technology, right? Something comes up new, and you're like, oh yeah, we should try this. But um, that's all great. But we do need to come back to the actual learning aspect of it.
Yeah.
For sure. So I guess if there are no more questions or comments, again, thank everybody for being here and listening to our presentation. I know there's a number of other ones that are going on that I also want to listen to, and so I'm glad that you came here and listened to us here. Thank you.
Yes, we are pretty much at the end of the session. So I just want to thank the two of you so much for taking the time to share your experience. I found I really did get a lot out of it, and it was really interesting to see, especially something that has such a practical element to it, and how you're tackling that in the remote environment. Because my course doesn't have a practical element, and I often wondered with labs or yeah, things like this, how they were coping. So that was really nice to kind of have you share that experience.